welcome. That's the end.
It's fine. There's more to the book. I read it. Thank you for writing this book.
Thanks for reading it.
It seems like sometimes when I've read memoirs by a previous generation of women who've been in bands or musicians, sometimes they, well, for instance, in Linda Ronstadt's book, it is more about horses she has loved than her creative process, I think, in part because she, perhaps, like, opening herself up was really hard because she had been, speculated on in the press and all these things, and it was a chance to control her story. What was it that you wanted to be able to say about your life? Why was it important for you to own your own story?
Well, I think so much of the story I wanted to tell was one of going from feeling disembodied to embodied, and I think part of that claiming of visibility and sort of shedding the divided self is to be a willful protagonist in your own narrative. I think so. I wanted to do that, and Sleater-Kinney seemed like the right shape for that story versus other things in my life that I've done since Sleater-Kinney or during Sleater-Kinney. So it is a journey where I find myself through the means of community and creativity. And yeah, it just felt important, I guess, to be able to kind of make some of the longing go away. And part of that longing, I think, was wanting to have a say in what was said about me.
Do you think that, in the same way that you write in the book that you never quite felt brave yourself, but songs allowed you to play brave, do you think writing works for you in that same way?
I think a little bit. I mean, people often are struck either, it really is, it's such an interesting perspective, people's take on the book, because it's either too vulnerable or not vulnerable enough, which you just can't control. But that's not how I felt writing it. I hated writing it. I mean, writing is really hard. But it's not a diary, it's a book. There's craft to it. I'm thinking about the architecture of it. I'm thinking about structure, chronology, narrative, arc. In some ways, who is writing it? I was reading Vivian Gornick, and she talks a lot about, like, if you know who is writing, you know why they're writing. And so in each, instance, in each situation that we have, we're different people. We might be a daughter, we might be a musician, we might be a bandmate, a friend. And so each part is written from that perspective, and that really helps. But that also allows, I think, for that kind of trying on of, because depending on what facet of yourself you're writing from, some of those I have this kind of emboldened feel, and then you also don't feel stuck in thinking, is this the definitive version of this? It's like, no, this section is sort of my perspective as a daughter. I could go back and rewrite that section from a different facet of who I am. And that, in the craft of it, was an empowering process.
What sort of materials were you working from? Were you a diary keeper?
I did some tour diaries. I wrote a lot of letters, actually, instead of writing journals, especially when I traveled. Postcards, letters to friends, and I had some of them send those back to me. Miranda July and I have had an epistolary relationship for years, in addition to a real-life friendship, but we have often documented instances in our lives through the writing of letters to one another. So I, asked her to send some of those back to me, which can be embarrassing, but at the same time, you want to kind of fill in the gaps, sort of color some of the memories that have faded. I talked to my sister, my uncle, did not really interviews, but just wanted to kind of help with certain elements of the book. not even for veracity, but just for the sake of clarification.
When you were rereading some of these things that Miranda sent back to you, or other materials, what were the sort of things that would embarrass you?
I mean, I actually was most struck by how similar I am. I was really loquacious, and I just thought, I am still like that. Like, I'm still can be garrulous and just like circumlocutionary in the way I speak, and it's just even, like I just was like, I'm 20 years old writing this letter, and who do I think I am, Virginia Woolf? I'm not, but that's what those are the things that I love reading, I mean, I don't just, but I don't know, but it was just, I just thought that there would be this almost crudeness to it, like it was gonna be this sort of like teenage self, and I realized as much as I've changed and grown, there's certain aspects, and I actually found that not necessarily embarrassing, but it was a little silly to hear that voice coming out of someone that was younger than I am now. I felt a little bit self-conscious about it, although I think Miranda found it charming, but and maybe I'm sure that's what I was trying to evoke from her.
Do you think you had to develop some compassion to your younger self when you were either going over these materials or looking back at your life? Like, were there times where you were just like, oh, stupid teenage me, or,
I mean, both. I mean, there's an early section of the book where I recount, a lot of people assume, when I first started on Portlandia, there was this surprise, because especially if people had known me from Slater-Kinney, many people that saw Portlandia or have seen Portlandia still don't know I'm in Slater-Kinney, so there's those people, which is totally fine. And then there was the people that knew me from being in a band, and they were so surprised by, oh my gosh, I didn't know that you did any acting or performing, and so there's this part of the book where I am kind of recounting incessant, copious amounts of performances, and it is dizzying. And it's kind of ridiculous, like how in almost any social situation, I would just insert myself into it via performance, very clumsily, often without any training, ballet, which as you can imagine, I'm not very good at. The other night in New York, my friend on stage in this kind of situation was complimenting me on dancing by saying I reminded her of Steve Martin dancing. So you can imagine that, I'm not really a classical dancer. Juggling, just clowning around, just a lot of performance. And that part of my younger self I could just feel the anxiety and feel the kind of desperation. So in that sense, I felt a combination of both empathy and also sort of just head shaking, disbelief.
When I was reading